I can confirm it's now recorded. Thank you.
Okay. A few more seconds. Right, on the stroke of 6:30, I am delighted to welcome everybody this evening to the meeting of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee for Maidstone Borough Council, being held today, the 9th of February 2021. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel, and this will include the instant message. Will anybody else be recording the proceedings? And I'm asking that just so that other people are aware, not to prevent you. If I hear nothing, I will consider that there's no one else recording.
Councillor Malcolm Mackay, I reserve my right, Mr. Chairman.
And that is noted by everybody participating. Thank you. My role as chairman will continue as usual this evening, but I will be assisted in managing the meeting by the Democratic Services Officer, who this evening is Miss Parfitt. This officer will not steer the debate, but they will assist in implementing the remote meeting protocols. Ms Parfitt will also be producing the minutes and provide procedural advice as required. I would like to remind members that instant messaging will be visible to all those viewing the meeting and must only be used by members to indicate their wish to speak. It should be noted that there is a technical issue with the Skype that's causing the instant messages to show in smaller text. So I will be relying upon Miss Parfitt to point out to me if I miss anything, and if that isn't successful, we will adopt a different tactic. Let's move to calling the attendance register. Miss Parfitt, could you help us, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So, Councillor Burton.
I am present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor English.
Present.
Councillor Garton.
Good evening, present.
Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Present.
Councillor Mackay.
Present.
Councillor Mumford.
Present.
Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Spooner.
Present.
That concludes the attendance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Could I also ask you to advise us all which officers we have with us this evening, please?
Yes, Chairman. So with us this evening, we have the Director of Regeneration and Place, William Cornwall, Head of Finance, Ellie Dunnett, for item 16, Senior Business Analyst, Carly Benville, for item 16, Head of Policy Communications and Governance, Angela Woodhouse, Policy and Information Manager, Anna Collier, for item 17, Interim Local Plan Review Director, Philip Coyne, Head of Planning and Development, Rob Jarman, Planning Team Leader of Mid-Kent Legal, Russell Fitzpatrick, Strategic Planning Manager, Mark Edgerton, for item 19, Planning Policy Officer, Anna Ironmonger, for item 18, Parking Services Manager, Jeff Kitson, for item 14, and Service Analyst, Alex Wells, for item 15.
Thank you. We can move immediately to agenda item 1, apologies. I believe we're a full house. There are no apologies. And then at agenda item 2, we can therefore confirm there are no substitute members this evening. At agenda item 3, I'm pleased to report that we do not need to consider any urgent items. So at agenda item 4, can we take a note of visiting members, please? I believe we might have Councillor Nagy with us, is that correct?
Councillor Nagy's here, and I would like to speak on any items if I indicate, Chairman.
So you're reserving your right on all items.
Thank you.
Do we have other visiting members, please?
Councillor Spring, and I'd like to do the same, please. Reserve my right, if permitted, on any item.
Councillor Perry, the same for me as well, please.
Are there any others, or have we covered all?
No, you've got councillor commands, but I'm not registered to speak. I'm just here to observe and to learn. My big learning curve as a councillor.
What a wise man that will make you, even wiser than you are already. Let's move on. Item 5 is the matter of disclosure by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, please? I hear no indications, therefore that will be noted as nil. And similarly, on item 6, are there disclosures for lobbying? I will ask our clerk to go through the list, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Burton.
Beyond the local plan in its whole, I can't think of anything specific.
Councillor Clark.
Local plan as a whole.
Councillor English.
No.
Councillor Garton.
Only local plan, particularly with regards to the Benham sites, but nothing in only Gen 1, nothing specific.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Local plan, please.
Councillor Mackay.
No.
Councillor Mumford.
Item 18 and 19.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
All items regarding to the local plan.
And Councillor Spooner.
Items on the local plan and Heathlands in particular.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the lobbying.
Thank you kindly. Agenda item 7 is where we'll consider for a moment if anything should be taken in private. We have no yellow pages this evening. I believe that we can hold all matters in public. If I hear no dissent, I will consider that to be agreed. That is therefore agreed. And so next we can move to agenda item 8, which are the minutes of our meeting held on the 12th of January 2021. I trust that you've all had time to consider those. They were circulated with the papers. Are there any matters of concern? Councillor Mrs Grigg, I see an indication from you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just refer to page 5, please, members and yourself, that has recorded the duty to cooperate item. I don't know if I need some clarification here, because it was my understanding that our last meeting, we asked for the protocol to come back to us for ratification. And I think that the minutes are pretty thin. I don't think they actually reflect that. And I can give you an example. One of the things that immediately came to my mind was that we agreed only to release headlines and not verbatim detail. With that in mind, if members agree with me and yourself, I'd like to request that this item actually does come back to us at this committee with that proper detail included.
Yeah, I would concur with you, Councillor Mrs Grigg. I don't think there's anything wrong in the minutes, but they don't capture the full essence of what was talked about and resolved. And yes, in particular, the parameters of the release of information. We all agreed those parameters, but I do think we should have that documented more thoroughly to be ratified, as the committee indicated before. There's another minor issue that occurs to me, which I think could also be addressed. When we discussed the statements of common ground and the matter that they would be brought to this committee for approval prior to signing, I do think we were quite centred around statements of common ground in relation to our own local plan making process. But of course, it's a two-way street. As part of the protocol, you'll recall that you asked that the chair and vice chair of this committee collaborate with officers, and that the duty to cooperate meetings would be proceeding in consultation with us, except when, of course, they are elevated to meetings that involve members. One of the matters that's been drawn to our attention is that Tunbridge Wells are at a stage with their local plan making and are asking to sign a statement of common ground. So I think that protocol does need to be quite clear in that regard as well. And to that end, I think the Vice Chair will support me in asking that statement of common ground be brought to the next committee for us to consider before it is signed.
I certainly do.
So not a matter of accuracy with the minutes, other than that it should record that we asked for the protocol to be written up and returned to us for ratification. So if that's an amendment, then I think that should be showing as 0.5. And then that would make sure that happens. So if I hear no dissent, I will consider that to be agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I think it is a matter of accuracy, because item or point 3, we had, if I remember correctly, and again, correct me if I'm wrong there, or the video may show more detail, but I believe we had long discussions about the record of the meetings, whether we can actually publish them or how detailed these records should be, because generally those meetings between officers or between different local authorities should or would normally often go into yellow paper. So I cannot understand that something like that should be actually being published on the council's website. I don't think we went down that line at all.
So I think this is why we need it just writing up for further clarity. And I believe what we said is that there would be a record of the meetings so that members of the public can see that meetings are taking place. That might extend to indicating the topics of conversation, but the verbatim record, because it's a protected conversation until agreement is reached, that is effectively a drafting of the Statement of Common Grounds, would be held until they are ready for our agreement or otherwise.
Indeed, but I think point 3 needs to be clarified as for the minutes, that we're only dealing about a basic record rather than verbatim or even a minuted record.
I'm not opposed to that clarification. So can we put some words to that? Are you wanting to amend that to say a basic record of the meetings?
Yeah, an outline record.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
And then the drafting of the protocol will put further clarity to that, I think, when it's produced for us to ratify.
Indeed.
So in actual fact, there's 2 amendments there, adding the word a basic record of the minutes at 3, and the 5th point that the protocol would be written up for ratification by ourselves is the additional 0.5. So once again, I'll turn to the committee and say, if I hear no dissent, I will consider that to be agreed as an amendment to the minutes. No dissent. In order to conclude this item, then we'll agree that the minutes with that amendment overall are an accurate record. And again, I'd ask for dissent if you don't agree. And therefore the minutes are agreed on that basis, and I shall sign those at an appropriate time in the future. Right, that concludes the matter of the minutes. Item 9, there are no petitions this evening. However, at item 10, there are 8 questions from members of the public. And let me just make sure I know the right place. Can I call upon the first questioner, which is Miss Hammond, please?
Thank you, Chairman. At the 9th of November 2020 SPI meeting, in response to your question about whether sites included in your local plan review, preferred approaches, had permission from landowners affected, you said, on the forms that were required to be submitted with site proposals, promoters were asked to confirm that the submission included confirmation from the landowner or the person in legal control of the site that the site will be available for development when proposed. I'm not aware of any that do not meet these criteria. Site 289 Heathlands Garden Community does not meet the criteria, as a large majority of the landowners were not aware of the submission, nor did they give their permission for their land to be developed on, as set out in the promoter's master plan. Do you wish to place on record that the officer advice you received to our question in November was factually incorrect?
Thank you. I have been assured by officers that sufficient land is available for Heathlands to proceed, for the Heathlands proposal to proceed in a coherent manner. Do you have a supplementary question?
Are you content? Yes, please. Are you content for a site without landowner's permission being submitted to the planning inspector later this year as part of your proposed new local plan?
As I've said, I've been assured that there is sufficient land available for the Heathlands proposal to continue to be worked upon. If you have specific information to the contrary, Maidstone, as the local planning authority, would welcome you sharing this. Thank you very
sure
much
do, and I'll definitely share them. Thanks.
The next question comes from Mr. Hughes, please.
Good evening, everybody. My question is, many small sites will not have come forward as part of the call for sites. Why are no small site windfalls allowed for during the first 3 years of the local plan review period, which at historic rates would amount to just under 350 dwellings?
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. And I need to respond to you that small site windfalls are always taken into account in the first 3 years of the local plan period. And that will be the same for this local plan review. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes. Isn't it the case, though, that the windfalls in the future, including the first 3 years of the local plan review period, are likely to be even greater than in the past, particularly after recent major changes in 2020 to permitted development rights to allow upward residential extensions by 2 stories and to allow changes of use from commercial, business and service uses to residential uses to be brought in by the government later this year, specifically to increase housing delivery after the pandemic, which will result in a significant number of small site windfalls over the first 3 years of the local plan review and beyond that.
So the reason we're very specific about this, and you refer to the first 3 years, is that they will be captured through planning permissions, sites under construction and completions, which are known when we reach the point of submitting the plan, and that this avoids double counting with an additional windfall allowance during the period. This is the methodology that was successfully used at the adopted local plan examination and at public inquiries. And again, I thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Next, we turn to Councillor Mrs. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. According to the committee paper, in total, there were in the region of 3,000 submissions to the Regulation 18B consultation. Of those, how many related to the proposed Lenham Heath and Lidsing garden communities? And are they being collated together rather than being dealt with individually?
Thank you. So first of all responses are treated individually, but we're also considering representations on a geographical and topic basis too. Approximately 1,500 submissions were on Lidsing and 500 were on Heathlands. Combined, they account for about 2/3 of the total number of responses. Ultimately, it will be for members to decide how much weight these responses are given in relation to other evidence that informs the spatial strategy selected for consultation at Regulation 19 stage. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please, Chairman. Why then do we have to wait for the SPI meeting of the 9th of March before your views on at least the non-garden community submissions, which presumably contain a lot of repetition?
Okay, so I actually did just touch on this with officers earlier today. And essentially the reason why we're looking at the information being presented in March is because of the volume of the information, it is still being analysed in detail. And I think it would be wrong to receive the information piecemeal, and the committee should consider the responses as a whole.
Thank you,
Thank you for your question. And now to Mr. Cooling.
Thank you very much. Leeds Langley Relief Road. A piece of work is being commissioned to explore the related corridor, therefore indicating the possibility of this road being established in the local plan review, should an allowance be made for perhaps 1,500 new houses along that corridor to assist the road's funding. Otherwise, if it does go ahead within the plan period, our borough will have a plan with up to 1,500 homes in excess of the government's formula requirement.
Thank you. So I think it would be very optimistic to think that there's any certainty to 1,500 homes from this source exceeding the current plan on period under review. The extra evidence required to demonstrate taking forward the scheme in such detail is simply not currently available. Therefore, we wouldn't be able to rely upon it at examination. We anticipate commencing the next review of the local plan very quickly after this one. And that would be the point at which we would be able to introduce that corridor with certainty, if indeed we've managed to establish it at that point. Do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you very much. So if members think that the inspector would just dismiss any allowance linked to this possible road, why doesn't MBC just declare the corridor as a broad area with a figure against it, and then either flesh it out with detailed sites or remove it and replace it with other sites at the next review in a few years' time, when the fate of the road may become clearer? Aren't we in the worst of all possible worlds by ignoring Leeds Langley Relief Road? Thank you.
I think it's in actual fact quite the opposite. In presenting it for consultation at this time as a protected area, what I think we're mindful of is the risk that sites would come forward piecemeal in advance of any certainty of a piece of infrastructure such as the road, and we would not be able to expect those sites to contribute to that infrastructure cost, because there is no defined project on the table. So I think what the draft policy at this stage is seeking to do is to protect the worst happening, which I'm sure you would agree is the right thing to do. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
And next to Mr. Horn, please.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. As a matter of urgency, could we see the copies of the agenda, briefing papers and minutes for all duty to cooperate activities since the 1st of July 2020 that have taken place with Tonbridge and Morning Council in order to coordinate strategic matters, including planning of homes and employment on the common border?
I'm sorry to say the answer to the question is no, and this would be in line with the protocol that this committee set in place at the last meeting, and that you've heard discussed under the matter of the minutes earlier. Do you have a supplementary, please?
I have indeed, thank you. The last minutes, as you are aware, Chairman, said that future updates from such meetings would be provided through the local plan review update agenda item. In the absence of any such update, can we therefore assume there have been no duty to cooperate meetings since your last meeting?
You may recall the somewhat detailed conversation when the committee were agreeing the principles of the protocol, and that included that the chair and the vice chair of this committee are briefed and advised of the progress of such meetings. And I can confirm to you that we are being kept in the loop and that meetings are ongoing, and that they either have already reached the website or are in the process of reaching the website. The headlines of the dates and the topics of those meetings are being published on the website. But the chair and vice chair have been diligent in following through to scrutinise that process.
Thank you.
Can I move next to Ms. Duff, please?
Yes, hello. The Council's strategic plan commits to aiming to deliver an eco and biodiversity net gain exemplar new community at Heathlands. Tonight's officer report on Heathlands also states that the new development aims to support the Council's wider air quality improvement aims and its declared climate change emergency. The Heathlands proposal is a car-dependent, air-polluting dormitory town that is questionable on how it will integrate biodiversity net gains and air quality improvements into the development, other than by tagging a country park onto the side of it. Air quality levels are already poor due to the proximity of the motorway and will be exacerbated by considerable further traffic generated by the 5,000 new homes in an unsustainable location. Why is the local plan review accepting a proposal which clearly contradicts the Council's climate change declaration?
I think one of the things about new settlements, and particularly those with scale, is that they afford the ability, by capturing land value uplift, to deal with a variety of matters which actually positively contribute to the climate change agenda. There are some key principles behind new settlements. One is actually that they would seek to internalise trip generation as much as possible. So at this point, I don't think it would be right to conclude that Heathlands' proposal is a car-dependent, air-polluting dormitory town. And there's much more work yet to be done. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. We've asked this question a number of times, and we've always received a bit of an evasive answer. Do you agree that the council-led garden community at Lenham Heath contradicts the council's own climate change policies and should be shelved as a preferred site in the local plan review?
I don't think that it would be right for me as an individual to give you a direct answer to that on a matter that is yet to be finalised by this committee's consideration of the consultation responses at 18B or at other stages of the process. But I thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you.
And next, Mr. Hammond, please.
Yes, thank you very much. The Weldon-Hatfield local plan has recently hit the buffers, with the planning inspector accusing the authority of unjustified bias in the selection of its housing development sites, favouring less sustainable locations over other locations with better access to public transport, for example. The same could be suggested of the Maidstone local plan review that chooses unsustainable, car-dependent locations like Heathlands over other locations which have better existing access to a rail station. If the council still believes garden settlements is the right spatial approach, do you think you need to review the original 9 proposed settlements again and look for sites that are genuinely the most sustainable?
Thank you. Again, I think we're preempting further decision-making stages in the plan, and I could not tell you what members of this committee or indeed the council as a whole will yet conclude. But I would observe that the draft spatial strategy has simply been put forward as part of the Regulation 18 Preferred Approaches document and is subject to ongoing consideration. It is based upon the evidence available and local circumstances at the time, and nothing has yet been finalised. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Seoul, Lennon Parish Council, Borough Councillors have all asked for the council to publish its study that looked for the right location for a new council-led garden community before it settled on heathlands. This was repeatedly refused by officers. How are you going to prove that there is no bias in your garden community selection?
I think the process of decision-making around this is open and transparent and being conducted in public at meetings such as this. Thank you for your questions. And finally, I come to Mr. Healy, please.
Good evening, Chairman. The Council's independent sustainability appraisal states that heathlands performed least well across the range of sustainability objectives. Other proposals for garden settlements, such as the one in Marden, scores considerably more favourably than others, yet appears to be suspiciously silent in your preferred approaches recently consulted on. Is this therefore a politically motivated local plan review rather than one based on sound, sustainable development planning?
Thank you for your question. If you consider that a plan being formed by democratically elected individuals, having due regard to evidence and local circumstances, is a politically led plan, then yes. And I'm sure that criteria, that definition would apply to all plans being made up and down the country. Do you have a supplementary question, please?
Yes, I do. Can you tell us how the findings of your sustainability appraisal then informed the selection of your preferred garden settlements in your preferred approaches?
So I am partly considering whether that question fully arises out of the original question or the answer, but all members involved in the process have had access to the evidence that has been presented, and I believe that we do have due regard to that evidence and to local circumstances. Thank you for your question.
Ignore the findings then.
Right, that concludes the section of questions from members of the public. Let me just see where we are next. Right, we're at item 12. This is the committee work programme. You have that in front of you on the papers. I'm just looking to see what I need to draw to your attention. The access to biodiversity and climate change funding will be removed from the work programme as referenced from this committee because it's been included within the P&R agenda for tomorrow evening. The anti-idling policy, I'd welcome members' consideration of this as to how we handle it, but there is scope for existing powers to be used to enforce this issue under the remit of the Communities, Housing and Environment Committee. So I would suggest that that's where that should move to. Additional item on the Council's response to the Government's consultation on proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, I think needs to come to us fairly urgently at the next meeting on the 9th so that we're in time for the submission deadline. And I'd also like to draw your attention that the Conservation Area Appraisal Management Plans Works Programme will actually be updated during the 13th of April meeting. As will also be a report on cycling infrastructure alternatives funded through the Business Rates Retention Pilot Scheme. So apologies that that's quite a lot of words relating to it. Does anybody wish to make comment? And the other thing I would just like to draw to your attention is that at our next meeting, where we will be seeing the consultation responses, lest it be necessary, the Vice Chair and myself have made a reserved date for an adjourned meeting to continue, which would be Thursday the 11th of March, should it be needed. And I hope that everybody will have that in their diaries. Does anybody wish to comment on the work programme in any way?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, only to say that I agree with you that the anti-idling policy should go to communities.
Anybody else wish to express a view on that? So on the basis that there is no dissent, we shall move forward on that basis, and we shall consider that the work programme is noted accordingly. Thank you, members. Item 13, there's no reports from outside bodies this evening, which takes us into agenda item 14. This is the matter that we deferred last time, discounted electric vehicle battery electric vehicle parking. And Mr. Kitson, could I ask you to assist us by introducing this item to us, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. This report sets out proposals to introduce a discounted parking tariff for battery electric vehicles, referred to as BEVs within the report, when parked in the council's off-street car parks or on-street paid bays from April this year. Our car parks remain a key component in supporting the economic viability of the town centre, with over 1 million parking events taking place in the council's car parks each year. It's estimated that at present, only 0.52% of all off-street parking transactions are made by customers driving BEVs. In contrast to non-BEV transactions, the number of users is very low by comparison. However, data does demonstrate a steady uptake in BEV use across the council's parking network. It's anticipated that if the current rate of EV growth is maintained, over 5% of all transactions may be from BEV users in the next 3 years. With more people than ever being aware of their own environmental impact and the drive towards decreasing urban emissions, these proposals represent a first step in developing a more efficient and environmentally sustainable parking tariff to support the council's wider air quality improvement aims as set out in the council's low emission strategy. This strategy recommends that the council will use parking policy to incentivise the use of low emission vehicles to improve air quality, which includes the provision of cheaper parking for low emission vehicles. If agreed, the discount will be linked to cashless transactions through Ringo and PodPoint, which both use mobile phone app technology. The report explains why emissions-based discounts cannot yet be applied to standard pay unit transactions. However, parking services are working on this aspect of pay unit development with leading suppliers, which may form part of future proposals if successful. Discounted parking for battery electric vehicles is intended to facilitate increased electric vehicle usage. However, this will not be sustainable in the long term, as electric vehicle ownership will undoubtedly increase over time, particularly as the government has announced that new petrol and diesel vehicles will no longer be sold from 2030. It's therefore recommended that any discount applied is reduced over time in line with increased battery electric vehicle demand and reviewed annually as part of the fees and charges process to manage financial risk. As requested by members, Option 3 within the report sets out the impact of providing free parking to BEV users. Aside from the financial impact, it's important to consider other risks associated with free parking. With this option, the customer will still be required to log the parking session on the Ringo app, as it is this software which identifies the vehicle through the vehicle registration number as being valid for discounted parking. There is a risk that BEV drivers may park without registering their parking session if free parking is recognised through promotion only. This may lead to unnecessary enforcement action and, of course, reputational damage. Parking without recording the parking session also impacts on data gathering, which is necessary to identify BEV usage and to reduce risk to income over time. At present, the electricity charges for each vehicle charging session is recovered, as supply charges are broadly comparable with the hourly tariff applied to each car park. If free parking through the Pod Point EV chargers was agreed, each charging session will result in a net cost to the council. This will include residential parking in the evening, where it's anticipated that off-street parking facilities will in time become charging hubs as residential EV ownership increases over time. It's therefore not recommended to apply free parking to either Ringo or Pod Point transactions. The report recommends option 1, offering 50% discount to BEV customers. This will result in a small income reduction of between £3,120 and £6,480 per annum. However, the number of transactions will of course be closely monitored and considered as part of fees and charges review each year. Option 1 supports the Council's wider air quality improvement aims as set out in the Council's low emission strategy, whilst carefully managing risk to income. This option also provides balance in applying a good level of discount to raise awareness of BEV activity, particularly to non-EV owners, and therefore provides one more reason for drivers to consider BEV ownership. These proposals demonstrate the Council's commitment to air quality, and if agreed, will lead the way in offering discounts for BEV motorists in Maidstone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kitson. Members, will you forgive me on this occasion for going in first on this item? I raised issues with this report last time it was heard. And I'm going to move straight in with a recommendation, which is as per the papers, except to say that 100% discount to parking tariffs for battery electric vehicles be applied. We have heard that there are risks associated to this, namely the issue that somebody forgets to register that they're getting free parking. I personally think that that is minimal. The greatest risk to this is the risk of success. We talk about climate change, we talk about air quality. I think it's time to not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk as well. And we should be bold and we should encourage this technology to improve air quality and our commitment to climate change agenda. So I am moving per the papers with the amendment that it be 100%. I'll turn to others now to speak. Councillor Garton, you indicated first, to be followed by Councillor Rich.
Mr. Chairman, may I second your proposal? Option 3 is less gimmicky, it is positive, it is enabling. It deals with local air pollution, which is a problem in the town centre of Maidstone. And we had this debate last month where I was a bit critical about it, and I think some of my colleagues also were a bit apprehensive with regards, are we subsidizing some few elitist people who can afford electric vehicles. Electric vehicles become more and more affordable. You can buy a second-hand electric vehicle, a good quality electric vehicle with 20,000 miles on the clock, which is nothing for a vehicle, for less than £5,000. So it is not elitist. It makes electric vehicles affordable. It gives an incentive. It is positive and enabling, as I said. This is where Maidstone can do with very little, with less than £5,000 is the cost, where we can do with very little money a lot to enable people to go fast track on the right track to make our world a better place. Question to Mr. Kitson: why do people have to register on the Ringo system, which may then lead to reputation damage, etc., and the ticketing, false ticketing, as you said? Isn't there already a database from DVLC which shows vehicles which are electric? And I believe there are some government thinking about giving electric vehicles blue or was it green number plates to allow them to access discounts and driving in bus lanes and similar things. So isn't there anything available which can be simply downloaded from DVLA and imported into the council's database? And the second question I've got, Mr. Kitson, is you're talking about a net loss to the council when people are charging. On these charging machines separate from the parking meter anyway, so that people would still have to pay to charge their vehicle, but regardless whether or not they're parking in a charging bay, they can park for free. So that free parking would obviously apply to bays which have no charging unit attached to it.
Before I just ask you to come back to that, Mr. Kitson, I think it's been drawn to my attention that we may still have some members of the public who were with us for the last item on this call. If you are and you're not participating in the later stage of the meeting, could I ask you to leave the call so that we can preserve the bandwidth for those that do need to participate? You're very welcome to rejoin the meeting using the webcast so you can continue to follow what we're doing. Sorry for that interruption. Mr. Kitson.
Thank you, Chairman. The first point in relation to DVLA database, the short answer is no, that we don't have access to that other than through Ringo, which is the suggested course of action, in that we would record the vehicle registration number, or should I say the customer will identify their vehicle registration number, and it's the app that would then explain to them the discount, whether it be 100% or 50%. You're right in that the number plates, there is an intention that the number plates would have some form of marking to demonstrate that they are fully battery electric vehicles. My understanding is that isn't live at the moment, and when it is in place, it may well relate to new vehicles rather than older vehicles. So the short answer is that identification of these vehicles can really only be efficiently identified through the app currently. In terms of net loss, I guess, Councillor Garton, you raised probably a very interesting point in terms of free parking. Currently, the charge for charging your vehicle, the hourly rate, is the same as the rate for parking. And as mentioned in my earlier summary, that the cost of that is broadly comparable with the hourly rate within the car park. So if you were to apply free parking to BEV vehicles, but still wish to charge whilst people are charging on the pod point, then the charge would remain the same as it is now, the hourly rate, if you're to cover the cost of recover the cost of charging the vehicle. If I could just add one other point while I have the opportunity. I didn't mention again in the summary, but there is also that risk, councillors, that if free parking was agreed, those people that currently have season tickets would most likely opt for free parking, those that have BEVs, of course, which would can well result in further losses in terms of income, as Councillor Burton identified, should it be that successful.
Thank you. Can I go to Councillor English next, please?
One would hope that we would have that sort of level of problem in a way, because there's been a lot said about various things, some cheap, some expensive, some probably politically impractical to deal with air pollution in Maidstone town centre and on roads to the town centre. Over time, a really successful shift to electric vehicles, whilst it wouldn't do a great deal for congestion, would do a great deal for the quality of public health, and actually would cut costs to a lot of public services, albeit some of those public services, well, all right, the majority of them aren't run by Maidstone Council. So I think as technology develops, this is something we do need to keep under review, because obviously we can't have a completely open checkbook, and we might need, at least in the short term, to do what I've been talking about and have a carrot and stick approach, whereas we're discounting on one side and, at least in the short term, charging to discourage things that we don't want to see. So, if that can be achieved as technology goes on. It's not something we can do this year, but we might be able to do it next year or the year after. So we should keep this under review to see how the tariffs and the costs stack up. But I think this is the most dramatic single thing the council could do in the next year to 2 years to actually show that we're serious about addressing climate change, rather than waffling on endlessly and not achieving very much at all, to be honest, apart from creating an additional source of global warming from the amount of heat councillors and officers generate on the subject. So I would like to add to what I hope will be a reasonable consensus and move forward on this. Obviously, if we do run into significant financial issues as a result of it, this is something we can review going forward. This is not something we have to do for the next umpteen years. It's something we can do now for this coming year, and then when you look at fees and charges again, if it's gone drastically well or drastically badly, we can look at it again, especially as technology develops and we might be able to recoup income on the other side of the ledger.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to endorse everything that's been said so far. Councillor English said an awful lot of what I wanted to say quite eloquently, so I don't really want to just repeat what he's already said. But I do think if we are going to do this, we need to be serious about it, and we need to go the whole hog, so to speak. I don't really accept the argument about, loss of face, because people may end up with parking charges because they haven't registered. Surely at the point that you are advertising the fact that there's free parking for electric vehicles, you would actually make it quite clear that they still need to register. So I don't really buy that as an argument. And as Councillor English said, and I think yourself might have said, what a problem to have that it's so successful, because the knock-on effects of the pollution and the air quality, I don't think can be underestimated. And if we are serious as a council that we want to tackle the climate change, then this is the kind of bold initiative that I think we need to be taking. And hopefully, from what I've heard so far, it seems that we are all on the same page as page on this subject. So I will leave it at that. And as I say, I wholeheartedly support making this a free parking. So I think it was option 3. Thank you very much.
And to you, Councillor Spooner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being a retired planner, I am very committed to the green agenda, as I'm sure most current planners are. And I think going for option 3, free parking for the battery and electric vehicles, it just shows so much commitment by the Borough Council towards the green agenda, which I think is going to be so important over the next few years. Also uppermost in my mind is air quality. And I think the public are now gradually realising that, a lot of this poor air quality and respiratory disease is due to their pollution with their vehicles. And let's do all we can to encourage conversion to electric buildings. To electric vehicles. I think we can do a lot by, I think we can achieve a lot by making parking free for electric vehicles in the town centre. And also it's going to be a boost for the town centre. It should bring more vehicles in. And we're only doing this for 12 months. Let's see how it goes, and let's hope it is the victim of its own success. I hope it is, and I have no hesitation in supporting the motion that you put forward, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And Councillor Clark.
Yes, Chairman. I would like to potentially move an amendment to the recommendation. However, I'm not convinced that it's entirely compliant with our equalities rules. At the moment, we've just mentioned that EVs are coming down in value, and people would be able to afford a £5,000 EV. My concern is that the people that start to gain access to those cheaper second-hand vehicles may not entirely be computer literate in all cases. And my concern is that from an equalities perspective, we could have somebody buy an electric car and be denied the option of being part of this initiative purely because they don't have the ability to log into Ringo or download it to their Nokia handset or whatever it might be. So I would like, I'd like to see whether we could explore beyond this proposal the option for making this available to all members of the public with an EV, including those that that are not computer literate or are not able to access this app. But perhaps the officers could come back.
Mr. Kitson?
I think the issue is identifying those vehicles, Councillor Clark. If we were to, as we said, we need to identify the number of vehicles so as we can keep very close control over the amount of people taking up the concession. That way we then know the amount of income loss, and then we can report that at fees and charges to amend that as necessary. The report did go into detail why we can't identify those vehicles through the current methods, through pay units. So if we were just say free parking for battery electric vehicles only, there is no mechanism for it to identify those vehicles currently unless we do use the parking app suggested.
Coming back to that, I can't believe that with the sort of numbers we're talking about, we couldn't at this stage have a manual process where somebody that is in that position could apply to the council and have something to go on their dashboard. Because at the end of the day, it will be enforcement officers walking around the town that will be making the decision on whether enforcement should happen or not. And I just feel that for the small administrative cost for having that for a select number of users who aren't computer literate would not be a great price to pay. And I think in terms of reputational damage, I think that will show that we're considering this beyond just those that may be able to they can use their apps, they can buy a new EV. This is something where we're actually genuinely looking at the market opening up to people with less money and less resources.
I think, Councillor, what you're suggesting is in fact another permit and another paper-based permit at that. We've taken huge steps in parking services in recent years to move away from paper permits and look to introduce technology. It's that gives us the efficiency in terms of identifying vehicles through technology. If I can give you an example, the handheld computers used by the civil enforcement officers are capable of reading the vehicle registration number and from that registration number populating all the details they need in terms of payment. We are doing all we can to move away from paper permits because of the cost and the inefficiency of such permits. So if I could just also make a point about the technical use of apps. Firstly, it doesn't need to be an app. It can also be a telephone call if you were to use Ringo. But my experience, and I've heard this at this committee previously, but my experience of people that are using latest technology technology vehicles, including battery electric vehicles, are well versed in using mobile phone apps and technology, and that's proven in the fact of the very nature of charging the vehicle in itself. Often, or in my case, certainly in Maidstone, always requires the use of an app. So I'm not sure it is the case that that particular group of people are not well versed in technology.
But I would contend that this is discriminatory, because we are specifically saying that it just so happens that new adopters have access to computer, they're very computer literate, they've got access to smartphones. But we're looking beyond that. We're trying to be more inclusive on this, and we're trying to say that people from a different demographic are moving into electric cars. And by taking this as it is, we're specifically denying them access to free parking. And I think they are the ones that we have to support. They're the ones that need it the most. I would like to move a recommendation that we explore this further with a view to making it available to those that do not have access to the app.
Okay, Councillor Clark. What I would say to you is don't stand in the way of doing a good thing by trying to seek to do a better thing at the risk of doing nothing. But on that note, does anybody support that amendment, please?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman, if I may butt in. It wouldn't stand in the way of anything. I mean, we would be additionally to adopting option 3, we would just ask Mr. Kitson and his team to go back and see whether there are any other ways but Ringo. And what I don't really understand, and I asked a similar question earlier on, if you may remember, why can Ringo get the information from DVLA and get a database of electric vehicles and NBC can't? That's still that missing puzzle in the jigsaw, which I don't understand.
Councillor Clark, can I ask for clarification of what you intend? Are you saying that that proceeding with this is contingent on what you're asking, or that we could actually get on and do what the motion is suggesting, and in the background do further work on?
I just think that we can't do one without the other, because I think that we are sending a message which I think it will cause damage to the council. We're essentially saying that we're providing a benefit to EV drivers, perhaps the most vulnerable. And I just think that that's unacceptable. I don't think that really follows the spirit of our equalities at the council. And if it means a small delay, if it means a little bit more extra effort, I think it's worth it, just so that we can be inclusive.
Well, I'm not going to be able to support your amendment if it's contingent.
Speak to this, Councillor Barnes, have indicated.
So I'm going to return to the list, and I do see visiting member had indicated, and I didn't call that first. Councillor Nagy, do you want your 2 pennyworth, please?
Thank you very much. Yes, well, it seems like a very excellent idea. I probably don't agree with it at the moment, because there isn't that many electric cars about, and it is a bit of a wealthy thing at this moment in time. But I wouldn't hold back on that, because it seems like it could work. But what I'd like to ask is, if there's no system of registering or something like that, and not every electric car is free to park, could people just park their cars overnight 24/7 and hog the bays? Or is there a time limit on this? Because it seems to me, if you go into the town parking and you've got free parking, what's to stop you from leaving your car there to recharge it till it's finished? And I'm very surprised if it is costing the council money to charge up cars, and we're going to give them free parking. I don't think that's very beneficial at this moment in time. So I'm not knocking the idea, but I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, Mr. Kitson would be able to confirm that. If people could just say, I'll go to town, leave my car there, go and do something else, and then pick it up later. Whereas, most people pay for a couple of hours now. But if we have a free car system, surely people could just leave their car there and hog the parking bays. I don't know if Mr. Kitson could just clear up for me, but it was just a general question. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Kitson.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Yes, I do believe there is a potential risk of that. The car parks themselves all have, or the short stay car parks have a maximum stay, as you know, of 4 hours, and we do control that and enforce that. But I guess there is that risk. At the moment, the occupancy levels of the current EV charging bays is still quite low. But there is that potential. What's very important about these bays is that they have turnover for those that need them. But there is the potential, there is the risk that people could be parking in those car parks for longer, in those charging bays for longer than necessary. Just one point I'd like to make is that we did say that the cost of charging the vehicle is comparable to the daily tariff. There is an argument that could be put forward to suggest that parking is currently free in those car parks if people are charging their vehicle already, because, as I say, the payment that's made merely covers the costs of electricity at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kitson.
Mr. Cornell, did you want to contribute, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Yes, Councillor Nagy really picked up on the point I was going to make, but I think that the risks just to think about are two. Number one, you could have the hogging of the EV charging bays themselves, and secondly, you'd effectively be paying people to park in Maidstone rather than having free parking. By the effect you're giving them free parking and free charging, you're effectively paying them to come to Maidstone, and I think it could have a kind of an unintended consequence in terms of the use of those EV charging bays. But Mr. Kitson would probably know a bit more detail than I, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't lost in the discussion. Thank you.
I'd like to move to the vote on the amendment fairly swiftly. Councillor Garton, have you come back on that already?
Can I come back on the amendment, Mr. Chairman, please?
Yeah, all right. Now I'll come to you, Councillor English, and back to Councillor Garton if needed.
As a matter of principle, if it's an issue of discrimination, the only option the committee can adopt, if they agree with the comments made by Councillor Clark, is option 4, that there be no discount. In principle, if it's an equalities issue, whether it's 50%, 75% or 100%, the discrimination still exists. So if people really believe that is the most important issue, we have to turn this down and have no discount until this issue resolved. I'm not arguing that, Mr. Chairman, because I actually think that would be a very foolish decision to make. No. But in principle, the discrimination exists, whether it's 100% of discrimination or 50% of it, if that's what people think. But I actually think you were right when you said going for a perfect scheme is the enemy of a good scheme. How many times have you seen procurement programs or policies shipwrecked because we wanted the last small detail right before we did anything at all? I think what we should be doing is proceeding with the investigative work that Councillor Clark and Councillor Garden want, and seeing what other options can be made available. But that it need not stop this decision this evening. It should not stop this decision this evening. This should be an and recommendation rather than I don't proceed until we've done this recommendation, in my honest opinion. And I would ask the movers of the amendment to consider rephrasing it so that further work takes place at the same time.
I'm happy with that, Chairman.
Right, so you're withdrawing your amendment, or you're amending your amendment to say...
I do want the work to continue, because I just feel that if we feel content with our decision tonight and leave it at that, I think that we're sending a very strong message that we're not inclusive. And I think that if we have that alongside where the investigation continues, if officers are saying it's not ready now, then fair enough. That's something that we shouldn't hold up but we should continue and explore that to our best ability, because I just think it's the wrong thing not to.
So can I suggest that this is best dealt with by adding a point 3 to what we have as the recommendation on the paper? So the motion currently says that 100% discount, and that's in point 1. Then there's point 2. If we added point 3, that said that the committee requests that further work be carried out to seek a means to ensure that the application of this policy is further enhanced for fairness and equality.
For users that may have problems with the current form of access or something like that, or do not have access to the app. But yeah, I do agree that that's fine as a third point.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's the third point. So I'm happy to accept that into the original motion. Does my seconder also do the same?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I seconded both motions and amendments, and it is the "and," as Councillor English quite clearly said. It's the "and" we are trying to. In the end of the day, we want to do something positive and enabling, and we want to make it simple. And by making it simple, that you don't have to fiddle about with applications, etc. That is enabling to me, so I'm more than happy.
Thank you, Councillor Darton. Now, there are other people that haven't spoken on this yet. By way of fresh indications, would anybody who still wants to speak please indicate fresh, because I'm rather hoping that probably we've covered a lot of the points so we can move to a vote.
Can I just make one quick point, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please do.
Sorry. Are we proposing also that we give people the opportunity to pay by cash during the meter? If really inclusivity is that important, Mr. Clark, then you would include them. Personally, I think I would have accepted the papers as were. So, but you know, we're running round and round in circles, I think, Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford?
Very quickly, I think you've got there, but we're only talking about 0.5%. Loads of could be's, maybes and mights. If anyone really is concerned about what we're proposing here, they should be putting forward an amendment to review it after 6 months, and then we know what could be, might be, or may be. Let's get on with it.
Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't really understand this about the inclusivity. Parking things change. Councillor Mackay has said it, you know, cash machines are often removed. You know, the world moves on, and I think we're making this far more complicated than it need be.
Right, well said. So, if there's no further indications, can we move to the vote? I believe that we're all clear on exactly what we're proposing. Can I ask the clerk to take the vote, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Burton?
For.
Councillor Clark?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Garton?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg?
For.
Councillor Mackay?
For.
Councillor Mumford?
For.
Councillor Parfitt-Reid?
For.
And Councillor Spooner?
For.
It was unanimously for, Chairman. That is carried.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on. Right, we're at agenda item 15. Mr. Kitson, well, actually, it might be Mr. Wells helping us with this. To consider virtual permit management in Maidstone. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report proposes adopting a virtual permit scheme and inviting members to a workshop addressing the issues that we currently face with visitor permits in Maidstone. In order to operate the resident parking scheme in Maidstone, also known as the parking permit scheme, we use a back office computer system to manage and administer the permits. However, this system is now unsupported by the supplier and requires us to upgrade. To make the most out of this necessary upgrade, we propose choosing to procure a virtual permit system to replace our existing paper-based system, replacing the paper permits that we currently issue with virtual permits which don't need to be displayed in vehicle. Customers are able to activate these from their computers or handheld devices, which will then become visible on our office systems and visible on our enforcement officers' handheld devices. Whilst this will slightly change how a customer applies, there's no plans to change pricing structure or the variety of permits on offer. This will improve the customer experience of applying, reducing the time it takes from applying for a permit to actually receiving it from, I think, around 2 to 3 days to essentially being instant, and reducing paper waste and emissions from postage in line with our climate goals. Additionally, the system would lay the foundation to consider emissions-based permit pricing in the future if there was appetite for such a thing. So in that sense, it's future-proofing, but I just want to make clear that that isn't up for an option tonight. So yeah, these decisions line up perfectly with Maidstone's strategic goals, particularly relating to tackling climate change. However, one issue requiring further input from members at a later date is that of visitor permits. Historically, we've identified misuse of visitor permits in the town centre, with some residents selling these permits on to local businesses and commuters, allowing them to park in the areas specifically around Sandling and County Road. And additionally, we've identified people maybe not using permits in the spirit of the scheme, rather than using them for visitors, using them for a third vehicle. By going virtual, we aim to reduce visitor permit misuse by replacing the current indefinite permit, which isn't linked to a specific vehicle registration, with individual 24-hour tokens which are linked to a vehicle registration and must be activated by the resident before they take effect. The two main options and schools of thought regarding the use of these virtual tokens are either to offer 365 days worth of tokens, enough for a resident to continue to park every day in their allocated resident zone, or secondly, offering a reduced number of tokens to prevent residents using a visitor permit as a permanent third permit for a third vehicle. As this decision will affect all wards, it seems prudent to engage with members across the borough for a workshop at a later date, addressing in detail and providing good evidence as well what approach members would provide or believe would be the best option to provide the best net benefit to their residents. The workshop would include the chair and vice chair of this committee, as seems relevant, as well as one representative from each party to be nominated by members themselves. These findings would be brought to a later committee meeting for a formal decision to be made, following which a full procurement exercise would take place to procure a suitable system to implement the scheme. My recommendation then is to commit to implementing a virtual permit solution, which allows us to begin some of the paperwork and some of the stuff we have to get sorted in the background, and also inviting members to attending a workshop addressing the issues surrounding visitor permits before we go out to a full procurement. I think that's it in as many words as I can. I would now like to open up to questions.
Can I see if we have any visiting members on this item, please?
Yes, please, Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, obviously, County Road, that's half in my ward, and of course, the main problem is in the town centre because everybody likes to park as close as they can to the town. It would be nice if the town centre members were invited to consultation as well, as obviously we've got historical background and what goes on. And I think one of the things, whatever you have, you must be able to, the traffic wards must be able to check up instantly. With parking permits as they are at the moment, there's no way of registering through the glass, I don't think, of that permit's genuine or not, because I know I got stopped once and they wouldn't believe my permit was a real one until they actually took it out of the motor and showed it to them. And so I think it needs to be something that traffic wardens can easily identify that is the proper vehicle to the proper property. And I think at the moment where we can't register that permit to an address is probably the problem. So I think it's about time it was changed and had a good look at. And I think if it was me, I would like to suggest that town centre members, at least one of them from each ward, should be in the consultation or workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. To you, Councillor Clark.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Again, I'm going to come back to officers about this inclusivity of older people in the borough. There's many people along County Road that are elderly, and I would assume that many would not have computers or an app. What have you done as part of this developing this process to engage with them and find out how they would negotiate this if they don't have access?
Mr. Wells, do you want to respond?
Sure, I think that's absolutely a valid question to ask. One thing I would point out is that our existing resident permit scheme is an online-only scheme in terms of how residents apply. That being said, residents obviously who don't have perhaps computer or smartphone devices certainly still have the ability to either call up the council, where the council can help the system apply, or either come into the gateway, which I appreciate is probably less of an option under current circumstances, but under normal circumstances to come into the gateway and make their application through a customer services advisor.
But they can do it over the phone though currently, or that will carry on that same access.
Yeah, so we certainly wouldn't look to reduce the ways that they access the service from how we currently offer. If anything, we'd only be looking to expand it to new options, including smart devices, smartphones and tablets and all of those things. But we wouldn't be looking to reduce the available options of application to residents.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
No worries. Additionally, I will add that a full qualities impact assessment will be completed as part of the process. But thank you for the question.
And now Councillor Garton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, I'm not that familiar with resident parking permits and the procedure, but let me just recap what I understand here, and maybe you can confirm. So currently we've got two possible permits which are registered to two vehicles, plus there's a residence permit which you give to your visitor, a visitor's permit which you give to your visitor, and he or she puts it in their car. So what you're proposing now is that two vehicles are permanently registered on a computer database, and the third vehicle can be registered for 24 hours through this online process which you're proposing. Is that my correct understanding?
In a nutshell, that is correct, yes. That being said, the members' workshop would also be an opportunity for people to throw around options that they may feel are a better fit for visitors.
Okay, so the workshop will then ask the question, shall we give out 365 additional 24-hour tokens for visitors, or should we reduce the number or put further restrictions on that? Is that my correct understanding?
Essentially, yes, that would be the plan.
Okay, so the decision we do tonight is we give every resident 365 24-hour visitors token through that online system. There's no more paper to be put in a car windscreen. That makes sense. Now, coming back to what Councillor Clark just said, obviously, if somebody needs to register this 365 24-hour token with a vehicle, obviously, if we would do that through the gateway or per telephone, that would produce potentially quite a big burden on the council. If I call up every day and just register a visitor's car 365 times, that would be potentially quite a bit of a workload for the operators at the gateway. Is that correct?
Yes, taking that as more of a question in how we would address that. The options or the solutions on the market at the moment aren't limited solely to just web applications and web activation. So similar to Ringo, customers would be able to call a hotline to the supplier and activate their sessions through there. much like Ringo currently. I believe SMS options are available as well, so where a customer could text in to activate a visitor's permit, but I think that might vary from supplier to supplier. But certainly then being able to call a hotline to activate a parking session is generally industry standard, and certainly we wouldn't be looking for anything less than that for the very reasons that you just outlined there. So I'd hope that addresses that to some point, but if you have any further queries, I'll be happy to hear.
No, that clears it up, and it made it easier for me to understand, and obviously for me to confirm my own thoughts on this. Thank you very much.
Councillor Clark.
Chairman, I'm happy to propose the papers as they stand.
I'd be very happy to second the papers as they stand. Do we need a named vote on this, or can I seek agreement by no dissent? Does anybody dissent? Therefore, that is agreed as per the papers. Just one matter I would just say to the officers, would you seek the nominations for the group representation from the group leaders? I'm sure that's what you had in mind, but I think that would be the appropriate way.
That was the intended plan of action, yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Item 15 is dealt with. We're to item 16. Time to think about what's happening to the pounds, shillings and pence, and whether we're doing a good job or not. And I would ask Miss Dunne and Miss Benville to assist us with this item, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. So this is the third quarter finance and performance update, which covers the period up to the end of December. So I'll start with the financial position, which is set out in Appendix 1. This is giving quite a similar picture to what's been reported to you in previous quarters, with a number of significant adverse variances relating to unmet income targets for development control and for parking. So overall, we forecast a net income shortfall for the year of 1.9 million. Those figures that are shown in the report set out the position against the budget we set at the start of the year, but they don't include income that we expect to receive under the sales fees and charges compensation scheme. So obviously, once that's factored in, the position will look a lot more positive. Moving on to the local plan review. So we reported a forecast overspend in this area to the committee as part of the last quarter's update. Unfortunately, the projected overspend has since increased. The primary reasons for that variance arise from a few different factors, including increased spending on sustainability appraisals and transport modelling, the accelerated timetable for the local plan review completion, volume of responses to the December consultation, and the extension of contracts for specialist contractors. So we've been able to identify actions to mitigate that overspend for this year and to fund the additional costs incurred where required. Those actions are set out on page 45 of your agenda papers. And just to note that one of those proposals is subject to approval by Policy and Resources Committee tomorrow. And just to say, this is an area which is being closely monitored by officers from finance and planning sections. On the capital side then, there's just the one line that sits with this committee at the moment, and that's the Medway Street subway flood prevention works. Just to confirm that work is progressing there, although we're expecting to slip a small amount of the remaining budget into the next financial year. I'll leave it there on the finance side for now and hand over to Kylie for the performance monitoring update, but I'll be happy to pick up on any questions from members after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, and good evening, Chairman and members. Now, as you will see from Appendix 2 of the report, which is pages 48 to 51 in your packs, 3 of the 6 targetable indicators did not meet their Q3 targets, and one of them missed it by more than 10%. The indicator to have a red rating was the percentage of Priority 1 enforcement cases dealt with in time. It achieved 66.67% against the target of 100%. There were 3 priority 1 cases in the quarter, so just one of them was out of time. The turnaround time for these site visits to be considered in time is just 1 working day. And with the current COVID-19 restrictions in place, it was not possible for this one particular case. The team do, however, prioritise all priority 1 cases to ensure that they are dealt with as soon as physically possible. The percentage of priority 2 enforcement cases dealt with in time also missed the target, and this was missed by just 3.45%. The team have suffered from reduced staff levels in quarter 3, which has led to a higher volume of work per officer to account for this. And a new structure of the team has been agreed with an additional staffing resource. The new posts are currently being advertised, and it's hoped to have the new resource in place before the end of quarter 4. You will also note that we've included a graph to enable you to track the new indicator that is monitoring how many open planning enforcement cases there are at the beginning of each month. Next quarter, this graph will also include data on closed cases and cases received by the team. And lastly, good performance this quarter can be seen in the number of affordable houses we've delivered. We've delivered 180% more than the target was set. Also, the processing of both major planning applications and other planning applications hit the targets this quarter. I am, of course, happy to take questions on the report alongside Ellie for her finance report. Thank you.
Members, this report is for noting, but does anybody wish to comment in any particular area? In which case I shall. I think the thing that concerns me most is the reporting of the overspend on the local plan budget. You'll recall that we made a recommendation to P&R to look at allocating the additional 139,000 received, I think, the lower tier authority grant money to the local plan process. I believe that the report to P&R tomorrow is not supporting that proposal. But I think before you are getting an indication of the overspend within the local plan review budget. I think the expensive years are yet to come because we've got the things like the actual examination itself and all the barrister expenses and all that kind of thing. So it's the final stages of the local plan that historically proved most expensive. And at this point, we should actually be money in the bank from our £200,000 a year accumulation so that we're ready for that. But actually, we're in negative figures. So I'm just labouring that because it comes before P&R tomorrow. This committee has made its recommendations. I hope that some of you might be on P&R and that you'll carry that forwards. And I hope that the people burdened with the responsibilities of P&R decision making may be listening into this. But in black and white, there is some of the evidence supporting why we made that recommendation. And I do believe the position moving forwards is yet worse to come. If no one else wishes to speak, I will consider the report noted if there is no dissent. That's noted, and we shall move on. Thank you, members. Right, where are we now? We're at agenda item 17, strategic plan, proposed area for focus. Ms. Collier, would you introduce this for us, please?
I will indeed. Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The Council's strategic plan was adopted in 2019 to 2045. In July last year, Policy and Resources Committee agreed that the Council would undertake a refresh of the plan as there had been significant progress in areas of focus since the plan was adopted, and this progress can be seen at Appendix A. There is a very important need, or there is also a very important need to ensure that the Council's resources are in place to respond to the impact that the Borough has experienced as a result of the pandemic. This report asks members of the committee to provide feedback on the proposed changes of focus for the period 2021 to 26, especially in those areas within the remit of the committee, and these can be seen at Appendix C of this report. These new areas of focus were drafted based upon feedback from all members on future priorities, which we received in the summer, the public's feedback on the impact of the pandemic from a survey undertaken with them last year, and further feedback and consideration from both members and officers in the intervening months, which has been reflected in the report. Finally, members are also invited to provide feedback on the set of proposed key performance indicators at Appendix D. These have been selected in order to ensure that the Council can monitor progress towards recovery and will replace the Council's current KPI set. I recognise that there is other data that the committee may want to continue to receive, and members can either recommend changes to the proposed set, including additions or amendments, or as we do currently, we can continue to provide additional information as committee requests it, either as part of the KPI report or as an additional report. This report was presented to Policy and Resources Committee on the 20th of January before being presented to each committee, and will return to Policy and Resources tomorrow with any recommendations based on feedback from this committee and Earl and Chi. Myself and Angela Woodhouse are happy to take any recommendations you have, or indeed any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction. The IM is playing up a little bit for me at the moment. Do I have any indications there?
Chairman, there are no fresh indications.
Okay. It's not playing up then. I thought we'd all be coming forwards with consideration on this. I don't know whether we know what the Earl Committee have already suggested, but there is an area in the COVID recovery KPIs that I think needs looking at. It's on page 77. And the reason I'm sort of saying this here now, because I think what I'm going to talk about relates to our local plan review considerations around employment. I observe anecdotally in the marketplace that we are getting, I think we're all ready for the big firms in London giving up their offices. And we've even thought that might mean that creates opportunity for us locally to provide hubs and the like. However, I think we're also seeing firms giving up office space more locally. In particular, I would say Kings Hill, which is not in our borough, but I think has an employment impact. So I think there should be a KPI around that economy section on page 77, which keeps a watching eye on office space vacancy rates, because that will have an impact to our employment strategy, which has an impact to our local plan allocations. That's my thinking. I see I've now got an indication from Councillor English.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm inclined to agree with you that we need to have some indication of office occupancy levels, vacancy levels, or indeed across the economic sector as a whole. It's not the easiest thing to record in some ways, because you're not always comparing apples with lemons, let alone pears. But the indicator, if it can be adopted, is probably a sound one, Mr. Chairman.
So I would like to make the suggestion that we recommend that P&R consider adding a suitable KPI to identify vacant office space both within the borough and areas immediately adjoining it. I don't know if I have a seconder for that, and I think I've got Councillor Clark and then Councillor Mackay wishing to speak.
Yes, I think I was indicating, Mr. Chairman, if it's possible to pin it down, that I would second you.
It would be as I've just described, but P&R would need to refine it or give it to Earl to look at, I think. Was that sufficient for you, Councillor English, or do you want it pinned down more?
At this point, certainly.
Sorry, there was an interruption in the sound then, I didn't hear you.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, yes, no problem.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll consider that to be a seconder from Councillor English. Councillor Clark, you're next.
Yes, I actually did provide some feedback directly to Mrs. Broom on this. 1 second, I'll just bring it up. There was a couple of things. The town centre footfall, we've got many of these indicators that say when they reach pre-COVID levels. And my suggestion there was that some of the businesses in towns that aren't going to reopen, potentially because they've closed in the short term. In the long term, those vacancies may change. But I think in a way we need to look at this in two stages. There's when it comes back to as it was, but we also need to look at the businesses that are remaining. If they get back to their normal level and there's a wider vacancy rate because of the businesses closing down, there is an indication there to show that traffic to those businesses has recovered, even though the overall footfall is down. And I think that interim level will give us a little bit of an indication, rather than effectively saying what we need is all of the businesses that stay around have to have a footfall much higher than before to compensate for a number of businesses that have closed. Of course, in the long run, I think the idea of those vacancies, those building vacancies being sort of being leased and the numbers coming back, that will be when we genuinely have recovered. But I just thought it would be helpful to have that interim. The other thing was to do with running costs on the office space, and that was to do with we have an indication of how many people can work away from the office and how many people, but just from our experience during COVID. So we are able to put a bit of a target amount on that. We could look at the cost per individual head count at the council. We can work out how many people potentially can work from home, and we can actually come up with a number. So rather than sort of leaving that open, I think we could actually put more information on that. And the other two main ones, there was a couple of others that I've given feedback on, but they're the two main ones.
I'm just going to pick up on your point there, because you have begun to express something that crossed my mind. So when you look at what would recovery look like, and when footfall figures close on pre-COVID levels, I think you should be looking at them either reaching pre-COVID levels or plateauing, because if we see fundamental change in behaviour, the plateau, I would suggest, indicates the maximum point of recovery you're going to see.
I think that's a good point. I think the problem with until they reach pre-COVID levels might be a target that just isn't going to add any value to us. I think we do need to see where have we got to the point where businesses that are still in the town have achieved what their potential is to achieve in a post-COVID sort of environment. And obviously in the long run we may have vacant spaces that are taken up, and we can look at a new indicator. But I think your idea of a plateau is very much along the lines of that, and that's an achievable target rather than just numerically looking at getting exactly the same as we had before.
So I think we would be making a further recommendation that P&R consider adding a word or two to the recovery column that takes plateauing as an indication of considering whether further recovery is likely. I mean, these are just suggestions we're feeding into.
I think the concept of having something interim is going to add more value than just looking at the previous levels.
Okay, Councillor Mackay, do you want to contribute?
A very brief one. I'm always conscious that it's easy to add a KP. I think we should have our own rule that for every KP we introduce, we actually say to the officers, I don't need this one. Otherwise, it's go on and on and on. So can I suggest that we suggest 2 that can be deleted, or 1? I would also like to say, if we're really looking at just the business activity in Maidstone, it might just be easier to measure the take-up of car parking spaces in long-term car parks at 9 o'clock. Quite frankly, that's going to give you as good an indication as anything, really, of activity in the town. But that's a simple idea, and I like simple ideas. Keep it simple, stupid. Maybe that's me.
I think the metrics and methodology for examining footfall is already in place, and of course your suggestion wouldn't capture the many that go in on the bus.
It's consistent. It just measures people using long-term car parks. People using long-term car parks mean they're working in town. But anyway, look.
Yeah, okay.
I said it half in jest because simple things tend to not be accepted. We prefer the more complex.
Anything further to add from anyone? Or shall we conclude our deliberations at that point with those 2 recommendations for P&R to consider tomorrow? That they consider an indicator of vacant office space within the borough and neighbouring areas, and that they consider analysing the concept of plateau in KPIs such as footfall, and don't simply look to re-establishing pre-COVID levels. Hopefully those words were specific enough for our esteemed clerk to capture. If there is no dissent, I will consider that to be this committee's recommendation to P&R.
No, you can count me out of that. No, I do dissent. So, Councillor Mackay.
Okay, in which case I think we need to possibly take a vote then, in actual fact. So I move that we recommend to P&R that an additional KPI be sought to monitor vacant office space both within the borough and in neighbouring areas, and that secondly a concept of analysing a plateau point in recovery figures also be considered. I think I have a seconder in Councillor Clark. If no one else wishes to speak, thank you, Councillor Clark. Can I ask that the clerk helps us with the voting process?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Burton.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor English.
4.
Councillor Garton.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
4.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Parfitt-Reed.
4.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. With 1 vote against, that is carried.
Don't I get a go?
Oh, did you get missed, Councillor Mumford?
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Mumford, my apologies. I'm so sorry.
I'm only small. 4.
Thank you, Chairman. Still with one vote against, that is carried. My apologies again, Councillor Mumford.
Okay. Thank you. Right. At which point we've concluded 17. We can move straight into 18. Are members content to continue, or is there any need for a comfort break from anyone? Vice Chair, what do you think?
I'm happy to continue.
Right, we'll crack on a bit then. Let's move to item 18, the Bolton-on-Chelsea Neighbourhood Plan. Mrs. Ironmonger, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. The Bolton-on-Chelsea Neighbourhood Plan has reached the stage of independent examination. The examiner's report was received on the 17th of December 2020, which concluded that, subject to modifications, the neighbourhood plan met the basic conditions and recommended the plan proceed to referendum. The proposed modifications are set out in the examiner's report and include inserting supporting justification text at a number of policies, improving the clarity of text, policies and maps to help improve interpretation, and then correction of a few typing errors. The Parish Council have incorporated the examiner's recommended modifications, and the modified report, modified neighbourhood plan, can be found at Appendix 1 of your report. If the committee is satisfied that the Bolton-on-Chelsea neighbourhood plan meets the basic conditions and it complies with statutory requirements, or to do so with modifications, then it must decide what action to take in response to the examiner's recommendation, i.e. to move the neighbourhood plan to local referendum. Following a successful referendum, a neighbourhood plan becomes part of the development plan for the borough, where a local plan authority agrees to send a neighbourhood plan to referendum. The plan will be given significant weight in decision making. The neighbourhood planning protocol was recently updated, and a post-examination neighbourhood plan is a significant material consideration in decision making. There are two recommendations of this report this evening. The first, the modifications to the neighbourhood plan is as set out in the examiner's report be agreed, and that the Bolton-on-Chelsea neighbourhood plan proceed to local referendum. Thank you.
Any questions for this?
Councillor Mumford and I have indicated, I think.
That list. Mr. English.
Chairman, your video is freezing, and I think it's causing some issues on the sound. If you may be able to turn it off to see if that improves it.
Has that helped at all?
I think you need to turn the picture off, David.
I have done that.
All right.
Is that helping at all?
Slightly, but it's not completely clear.
Right, I'm getting red lines on my signal strength. If it's intermittent, can I pass to the Vice Chair to pick this up?
Certainly.
Apologies, Councillor Grigg, but Councillor Burson, whilst you're in the room, you are present as Chair.
Okay, I delegate the chairing of the meeting to the Vice Chair. Councillor Grigg, please proceed.
Okay, Olivia?
Yes, Councillor Grigg. Or okay, Chairman, then. Apologies.
Councillor English, would you like to go ahead?
I'm sure Councillor Mumford will want to formally move it, so I will second it in due course if appropriate. I think it's interesting that this is a local plan proposal, a local plan with the fewest amount of significant modifications I think I've ever seen, which pays tribute to the work of the Parish Council and their associates who have worked on this proposed neighbourhood plan put in, and it's an excellent job, well done, and I hope that we will support the recommendations on the paper when they're duly moved in the moment, I imagine, by Councillor Mumford.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mumford?
Well, it's taken long enough, so I won't keep you too long. We started in 2012. It's taken 9 years. I wasn't an old age pensioner when I started, but I'm extremely old now. I'd like to thank the community because they have put a lot into this neighbourhood plan, the councillors who led aspects of it. But in particular, I'd like to mention by name Councillor Doug Smith, who has driven this to the point we've got it in. and also the support of the parish clerk. So I would like to propose that we follow the recommendations of the officers on point 1 and point 2.
Seconded.
That's wonderful. I do notice we didn't actually ask if any visiting members would like to speak on this.
I think the chairman tried to, but he didn't actually get through.
Well, I'll take no reply as that you do not want to. Councillor Chairman, are you back with us?
My signal indicator has gone back to its normal.
No.
He's not.
No, he's not.
Okay. Right. Well, let's go back to the papers then.
He never left, did he?
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? I'd certainly like to extend our congratulations to Baltimore-on-Chelsea for this excellent plan. And if everyone is in agreement, I think we should go straight to the recommendations. One, that the modifications to the Baltimore-on-Chelsea neighbourhood plan as set out in the examiner's report be agreed. And two, that the Baltimore-on-Chelsea neighbourhood development plan proceeds to local referendum. If I have no dissent from that, I will take it that everyone is in agreement. That's wonderful then. I think that is the end of that item. Are you okay with that, Ms Parfitt?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Lovely. In which case, I don't know if our chairman is back. If not, we'll go on to item number 19, which is the local plan review update. Okay. Well, prior to this introduction, I believe we have two members of the public who'd like to take on a 3-minute statement. Can I start, please, with Mrs. Geraldine Brown? Are you there?
I think so.
You've been waiting a long time.
No, I just had a blip for a minute. So, okay, thank you. Chairman members, this and your March meeting are very important for shaping the local plan review. At your last meeting, you reacted to the submitted paper on proposed arrangements to discharge duty to cooperate, insisting that the decision role of members should come to the fore. That is essential, as at the local plan examination, MBC was very fortunate in persuading the inspector that discharge had been diligent. Tunbridge and Morling and others now also have to discharge this duty, giving added exposure. Local plan preparation also witnessed the unedifying spat between Maidstone Borough Council and Highways. The parties now claim to be cooperating, and we hope that never again will we see this. Residents' views would appear to be unwelcome. There has been no effort to report key messages from the 3,000 response to Reg 18B consultation. That blizzard of submissions would appear to be used as cover for just carrying on regardless, and that ignores those who contribute council tax to the funding of the borough's resources and services. Your voters are being ignored. This is illustrated by the blunt refusal to remove some of the so-called red sites that were submitted in response to the call for sites. That has left uncertainty for affected residents, while MBC must know that many of those submissions are non-starters. That is dismissive of the levels of stress unnecessarily caused to many in our borough. Then there is the issue of neighbourhood plans. Much effort and expense has been and is being expended by many in our borough. As you heard in the previous agenda item, we have exchanged several emails with MBC in an endeavour to clarify the role and value of neighbourhood plans within the context of the local plan and the local plan review. What we have heard is far from reassuring, and we will return to the matter. Finally, we have an overwhelming feeling that MBC is seeking to maximise development in our borough, and a coordinating team member will be speaking on that shortly. MBC has taken excessive pride in hugely exceeding the housing delivery test, when in fact that is a clear sign of lack of planning and control. There has been complacency in the face of enthusiastic overbuild by developers, with no endeavour to define and deploy planning mechanisms to manage development rollout more closely to the local plan. Our borough's future is substantially in your hands, and we ask you please to use this local plan review to reassert the interests and importance of current residents, your voters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brown. Can I now ask Mr. Peter Cooling if he's still with us? Mr. Peter Cooling?
Hear me now, I hope. Apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you'd like to go ahead, please, sir.
My apologies. Members, Leeds Langley Relief Road, your committee's briefing paper potential will now be explored. We assume that if it went ahead, 1,500 new dwellings will be established in the corridor that is being reserved for the road. This review should include a contingency allowance for a portion of that 1,500 that could appear during the later years of the plan period, taking the place of several provisionally selected sites. If that is not done and the road does go ahead, our borough will witness more new housing than required by the government formula, to be precise, those to part fund the road. At the next local plan review, perhaps 5 years away, that contingency allowance will either be replaced by specific corridor sites to fund the road, or, if it does not go ahead, by sites in that corridor or elsewhere to contribute to that future plan's overall need. If MBC is serious about applying the local plan policy LPR1, it will build that contingency allowance into this local plan review and take out a few identified sites or perhaps even a garden community. Windfalls. Your paper, paragraph 1.6, makes it clear that no allowance is made over the first 3 years, excluded because they will be expected completion with planning consent at the start of the plan period. That is a false argument for small sites, as even if they are, they will still be windfalls, not specifically identified sites in the current local plan. Using MBC's own historic trend figures, windfalls should now be increased by 342 for small sites. Further, using MBC's own figures still leaves an overall unexplained deficit of 540 dwellings against the total potential number over the plan period. That leaves an overall shortfall of just under 900 in windfall assumptions, the equivalent of several specifically identified sites. Finally, contingency. Reg 18B, paragraph 8.3, reduced the assessed capacity of identified sites outside the town centre by 20%. That is about 525 dwellings. Other sites had to be declared to fill that contingency. Is that sensible? The above indicates that 2,000 dwellings, perhaps more, could be removed from Reg 18B's identified sites. Ignoring that does not look after the interest of current residents. There is an overwhelming feeling that MBC seeks to maximise housing development in our borough rather than seeking to minimise. Why is that? Will this committee now require that all reasonable evidence and arguments are deployed to minimise the requirement for new housing, enabling removal of several sites from the Reg 18B list? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to both our speakers. I'm sure that your statements the members have found them very helpful. I would like to go on now, please, and ask Mr. Mark Edgerton if he can now introduce our report.
Thank you very much, Chair. Processing and analysing the responses to the Regulation 18 Preferred Approaches consultation is ongoing, given the very significant number of responses received, with a view to reporting an analysis of the consultation to the March meeting of this committee. The report highlights that the amount of new housing and windfall features within responses, and it sets out the position in respect of these matters. This includes that there has been no material change in circumstances with regard to windfall calculations, which have proven robust at examination of the adopted local plan, as well as at planning appeals. The report does note, however, that the position will be reviewed for the production of the Regulation 19 Draft Local Plan Review consultation. The report also provides an update regarding the Leeds Langley Relief Road, which is subject of a safeguarding area in the Regulation 18 Preferred Approaches consultation document. The approach allows this corridor to be examined further to inform the position that Maidstone Borough Council should adopt going forward. Therefore, in order to establish whether a business case does exist for some of this corridor to be protected within the local plan review, a piece of work is being commissioned to explore the development potential of the corridor and its ability to provide the basis of a realistic funding package to deliver the necessary infrastructure. This work on Leeds Langley Relief Road has been undertaken in discussion with Kent County Council as Highway Authority. A reminder to members that the report is for noting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edgerton. Are there any visiting members that would like to speak this evening on this item?
No, I think as it's already been noted, it's the usual things tonight, really. Everyone saying at Lenham that the land's not there, and then the chairman saying, as far as he's concerned, it is. And we've had that at every meeting so far. So things just carry on as normal, I think.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nagy. Councillor Burton, I see that you have indicated to speak. Are you back with us?
That was an old indication, but if you can hear me, I'm back with you.
Yes, we can hear you. So I'm grateful to hand it back to you.
Right. I've not got any indications in the IM on this item. It is just for noting. If there is no dissent, we will. Councillor English might be. Yeah, he's just confirming his content note. If I hear dissent, I will consider it noted. And that concludes that item. In fact, I think it concludes the meeting. So, sincere thanks to everybody for their participation. I think we've gone through that very effectively. Special thank you to Councillor Mrs. Grigg, who ably stepped into the breach when necessary there. Superb, thank you. And I'm happy to declare the meeting closed and wish you all a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Good evening.